What does it mean to be ethical? Does it mean following laws even if those laws uphold injustice? What about standing by your community even when your community is silent or complicit? Does being ethical mean staying neutral in a conflict? Or does it mean taking a stand when others suffer? What about when a group of people are denied their land, their homes, and even their lives? Can ethics exist without empathy for those whose voices are silenced? Isn't this at the core of what religions teach us? Even if you're not religious, shouldn't ethics go beyond religion? As the suffering of Palestinians continues, we have to ask ourselves, are we truly being ethical if we choose comfort over truth or silence over action? I'm making this video because silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Some of you longtime subscribers are familiar with my past on speaking about this issue and as an activist. Needless to say, the oppression and displacement of Palestinian people is not just a political crisis, it is a moral and spiritual one. I'm choosing to speak from a place of clarity, compassion, and truth, and to me, doing that makes the uncomfortable feel comfortable. While the issue is said to be complex, the core truth should not. In this video, we'll go over the ethical teachings being ignored in this conflict, how mainstream media manipulates the narrative to favor Israel, the crucial difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, how compassion and spiritual maturity can guide our response, and what we can actually do even if we feel powerless. For over 75 years, the Palestinian people have experienced displacement, occupation, and violence. Entire generations have grown up as refugees. Families have been separated, homes have been demolished, access to clean water, electricity, and medical care has been restricted. Checkpoints, airstrikes, and military occupation have become a part of daily life for many. What began as a political conflict has created a reality where human dignity is denied to millions. The modern state of Israel was established in 1948 after the horrors of the Holocaust, meant to be a safe homeland for the Jewish people. The United Nations, under strong lobbying from the United States and the United Kingdom, passed a partition that splits the land into separate Jewish and Arab states. The US itself had been heavily lobbied by the American Zionist Emergency Council, which poured money, influence, and political pressure into winning support for the plan. But this land was already home to a large Palestinian Arab population. The creation of Israel forced over 700,000 Palestinians from their homes in what became known as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Villages were destroyed, families were never allowed to return, and since then, Palestinians have faced systemic racism, military occupation, and acts of violence that have even been documented by global human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They have endured home demolitions, mass arrests without trial, checkpoints that choke daily life, and military assaults that unalive civilians, including children. Imagine if that was happening to you and your people. Entire generations have grown up under siege, cut off from clean water, medical care, and the ability to move freely. How could this be called justice? How does this align with the Jewish values of tzedek, or justice, and chesed, or compassion, which call for fairness, dignity, and the prevention of suffering? So this is not only a crisis of politics or borders, it is also a crisis of ethics and spirit. When people are stripped of their homes, rights, and futures, we must ask what values are being ignored. The suffering of Palestinians is not something that can be explained through policy alone. It affects real human lives every day. Across all the world's traditions, both religious and secular, there are shared principles meant to guide us. In Judaism, there is a command to pursue justice. In Islam, compassion and the duty to protect the oppressed are central. In Christianity, love for one's neighbor and care for the poor are sacred instructions. In secular humanism, the value of each human life is held as a core moral standard. Those teachings align closely with what philosophers have called natural law. The idea that certain rights and wrongs can be recognized by reason alone. That people, regardless of culture or belief, can understand basic fairness. The right to live without fear, the right to raise a family in safety, the right to move freely and speak without punishment. These rights do not depend on governments or ideologies. They belong to people by virtue of being human. The principle of doing to others what we would want done to ourselves appears across cultures. So does the call to love one's neighbor. So these are not abstract concepts. They are meant to guide how we treat each other in everyday life, especially during times of conflict. When these values are not honored, the consequences become deeply personal. Children, elders, and entire families suffer in ways that leave lasting harm. This is why many now view the situation in Palestine not only as a political issue, but as a moral one. Because when suffering is ignored for so long, it is natural to ask whether the ethical foundation that societies claim to uphold are still being practiced. As mentioned earlier, in many traditions, many countries, many cultures, religion serves as a moral foundation. It offers guidance on how to treat others and how to live with integrity. In the case of Palestine, however, religion is sometimes used to support actions that bring harm. These include the taking of land, the expansion of settlements, and the restriction of basic freedoms. Some claim divine right to justify these actions. Homes are demolished, families are displaced, and walls are built that separate communities. However, the use of religion is not supported by everyone. Throughout history, many Orthodox Jewish communities and rabbis have spoken out against Zionism. Groups such as Neturei Karta believe that a Jewish state should not exist before the coming of the Messiah. They have marched alongside Palestinians and called for peaceful coexistence. These voices remind us that religious belief does not always align with political agendas. We will explore the topic of Zionism more deeply later in the video. The core teachings of Judaism include justice, compassion, and care for others. The concept of tikkun olam, which means to repair the world, calls for healing and responsibility. The principle encourages people to act with kindness and to support those who suffer. The ethical values found in Judaism are also present in Islam and Christianity. Muslims are taught to protect the vulnerable and show mercy. Christians are taught to love their neighbor and care for the poor. Many Palestinians belong to these faiths. They practice the same values of patience, service, and dignity, yet they are often treated as if their lives matter less. Their movements are restricted, their voices are silenced, and their families live under constant threat. So this treatment stands against the teachings found in the very scriptures used by those in power. Religious identity is not meant to divide people or justify harm if the core values are acknowledged and practiced. It is meant to bring people closer to justice and truth. When religion becomes a tool for control, its purpose becomes lost. What remains is suffering, and the people who bear it are those with the least power to respond. Mainstream media in the West often presents the conflict through Israel's perspective. Palestinian voices are minimized, and headlines focus on Israeli fears and reactions. Words like retaliation are used to describe Israeli airstrikes, while Palestinian resistance is described as aggression. The term Hamas is used broadly even when the events involve civilians who are not part of any political group. These language choices shape public opinion and remove important context. What this confusion does is serve the interests of powerful institutions. Many media outlets have close ties to political and corporate interests that benefit from supporting Israel. These include defense contractors, fossil fuel companies, and lobbying groups. Framing the story in a particular way helps maintain public support for military aid and arms deals. When people are confused or overwhelmed, they are less likely to ask questions about where their tax dollars are going. US politicians also benefit from this dynamic. Political candidates receive donations from lobbying groups like AIPAC that support Israel. Taking a public stance in favor of Israel can increase access to campaign funding and media exposure. At the same time, many politicians rely on voter support from communities that have been taught to see Israel as an essential ally. So speaking out for Palestinian rights is often seen as risky. So most leaders avoid the issue or repeat familiar talking points. There are also deeper interests at play. The land in question sits at the crossroads of key trade routes and energy resources. Control over this land brings strategic and economic advantages. Some corporations are interested in natural gas reserves off the coast. Others want access to ports, land, and infrastructure. Political and religious groups also have visions for what should happen to the land based on their beliefs and long-term goals. These overlapping agendas create pressure to maintain the status quo. So in this environment, confusion becomes a tool. When people do not understand the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, conversations are shut down. Anti-Semitism is hatred or discrimination toward Jewish people. Anti-Zionism is opposition to a political ideology that prioritizes Jewish sovereignty over others in the land. These are not the same, but blurring them helps silence criticism of government actions. Zionism began in the late 1800s as a response to growing anti-Semitism in Europe. Theodor Herzl, inspired by events like the Dreyfus Affair in France, argued that Jews needed a homeland for safety and identity. In 1896, he published The Jewish State, calling for a sovereign Jewish nation. A year later, the first Zionist Congress met in Switzerland, launching the World Zionist Organization. Their goal was to establish a Jewish home in Palestine, a vision that shaped the movement's future and its iconic blue and white flag. Criticism of policy is not hatred of a people. Honest discussion is possible when the public is allowed to hear all sides and ask deeper questions. Ending confusion makes it harder for powerful interests to act without accountability. A spiritually advanced perspective begins with the understanding that suffering must be healed. When we evolve in consciousness, we begin to shift away from focusing on who is right and who is wrong. The more important question becomes, how can we reduce harm for everyone involved? This perspective recognizes the trauma that exists on all sides. It does not ignore pain, and it does not dismiss the complexity of the situation, but it also sees the imbalance of power and harm that exists and responds to that with clear-eyed compassion. Compassion does not mean staying neutral. It means being honest about where suffering is most concentrated and being willing to address that directly. At this level of understanding, we are invited to hold grief for everyone. Every life lost matters. Every community that suffers deserves care. But holding space for multiple layers of grief does not mean we treat all actions as equal. It is possible to avoid moral relativism while still recognizing shared humanity. The call here is to act from a sense of unity. Real peace does not come from silence. It does not come from avoidance. Peace is rooted in justice. Without justice, peace is fragile, temporary, and hollow. When people are oppressed, denied their basic rights, or treated as less than human, peace cannot last. Acting from unity means choosing love even when it is difficult. It means doing the work to understand how systems of harm continue and being willing to challenge those systems, not just for one group's benefit, but for healing everyone. This view aligns with what some people refer to as the turquoise stage in spiral dynamics. We touched on deeper spiritual development, like stage turquoise in a previous video. For now, it is enough to say that this level of development sees interconnectedness as a lived reality, not just an idea. Healing requires truth, healing requires courage, and healing requires action rooted in compassion for all people, especially those who have been silenced or overlooked. That is what global compassion looks like when it becomes real. In a world full of suffering and conflict, it is common to feel powerless. Many people believe there is nothing they can do, but this belief often leads to spiritual stagnation. It becomes a kind of trap that prevents growth and action. There are several ways for you to contribute, even if you're on another part of the world. One step is to educate yourself and others. Seek out sources that are not part of the mainstream narrative. Listen to voices that are often ignored. Share alternative media and support Palestinian voices who are telling their own stories. Another way to help is through action. You can support boycotts that align with your values. You can contribute to humanitarian efforts that bring relief to those who are suffering. You can attend protests happening near you or even organize one yourself. These are practical steps that can support long-term change. Conversations also make a difference. Talking to friends and family can open space to challenge false or incomplete narratives. These discussions may not change everything at once, but they help plant seeds. Over time, they can help shift how people see the world. Also, you must understand, for those who are not into self-help or spirituality, Inner work is just as important as outer work, especially if you want the world to change. It is worth noticing any apathy, guilt, or fear you may feel about speaking up. These emotions are natural, but they do not have to be barriers. Becoming aware of them is part of the process. Growth comes from meeting discomfort with presence and care. Spiritual growth asks for honesty and commitment. It means facing hard truths instead of avoiding them. It means staying connected to both compassion and clarity. In this way, action becomes a form of spiritual practice. You're not just reacting to the world, you're choosing to be part of its healing. It takes effort to slow down and ask meaningful, ethical questions that go beyond surface level information. This kind of reflection can help support both personal growth and a more compassionate world. If this video brought up any emotions or made you think differently, you may find it helpful to explore other topics that we cover, such as stages of spiritual development, how to practice compassion, and ways to stay grounded during difficult times. If you want to dive deeper into topics related to psychology, spirituality, and how the world affects you, then check out this video right here.